All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Angela Hayes, and I'm an assistant director working with graduate students and alumni through the Career Center and also through the Alumni Association. And today we're going to be talking about building CVs and resumes. If I could get an idea first, how many of you will be working primarily on CVs? Okay, and so the rest primarily on resumes. How about both? How about those of you who are going to be doing both so that you can look at various types of positions? Okay. Let me start by saying that I don't know anyone who likes writing CVs or resumes. They're just not that much fun. I actually don't like working on my own. I like working on other people's, but not my own. However, this is the single document that will be opening doors for you for the rest of your life professionally. So it's really important for it to be fantastic for so many reasons. One is you're not the only one sending that document to whatever job you're looking for, and there can't be a mistake. We're going to talk about the various pieces of it, things to keep in mind. We're going to be covering a lot. So these are the main things that we'll cover. We're going to start by thinking about your dream job. It could be that you don't have one yet, but if you have a pretty good idea, we'll start there. We're also going to talk about how important it is to consider your audience. Now, I see people every day who come in with a resume or a CV that they've sent out to 50 different places. You can come in, it's fine. Come on, no problem. Yeah. And it's exactly the same, even though all of the places have different kinds of things that should have been emphasized or could have been emphasized. So it's very important to consider the audience. So we'll be talking about that. We'll talk about, obviously, the most important components of a CV or a resume. Sometimes I'll be using the word CV and resume interchangeably, depending on the context. The most important things to avoid. We'll look at some examples. You also have examples in this, if everybody got this resume and interview guide. There's also some things on the website specific for graduate students that I'll show you toward the end of the presentation. And then last, we're going to talk about additional ways to stand out, because in addition to your CV or your resume, very often you'll need a very strong online presence. So we won't talk about everything in terms of social media and all of that, but I will be talking about some things specific to CVs, portfolios, visual resumes, things like that that can add to what you're doing. So to start out, if you could just take a pen, and I'm not going to ask anybody what theirs is. I'm not going to break up in groups and anybody has to show anybody any of this. Just write down an example of a dream job, a possible dream job for you. And then once you've done that, I'd like you to take yourself completely out of the picture and just imagine what the perfect candidate for that dream job would possess. What skills, attributes, experiences, everything that you can think of that would be perfect for that dream job, and then write those out. Imagine that person planning, executing, accomplishing, winning, making a big impact. What are the things that would allow that to happen for that person in that position? Now, this is an exercise that I recommend people do before every single application that they fill out, before every time that they apply for a position, and certainly something that they should do now as a graduate student so that you can look at that list and add to that list when you have more time, because it helps you see what the gaps are in your CV or your resume. And then if people are game, what I suggest that they do is create a skeleton CV or resume of what they want that document to say about them when they graduate from graduate school here. And then we work back using the SMART goals through Locke and Latham to figure out what you need to do by when so that it will say that by the time you graduate from this institution. This period of time it's difficult because it's really easy to get caught up in the presentations and the papers and the classes and everything that you've got to do. And actually, back in my day when I was a graduate student, you could get a job with just getting really good grades and just doing your coursework. And it's not like that at all anymore. There's all kinds of other things that need to happen, leadership skills, outside kinds of things, going to conferences, just a lot more than what there used to be. So looking at people who are actually in your dream jobs, checking that out on LinkedIn or wherever, looking at their attributes, their background, all of those kinds of things can help you fashion your journey to the end of your degree here so that you'll be as ready as you possibly can when you graduate. So fill those gaps. Okay. The next thing you'll want to do, like I mentioned, is decide who your audience is every time you apply for something. Even if you're applying for two academic positions that are at very similar institutions, there are going to be differences. There'll be differences in their mission. There'll be differences in how they interact with the community. You need to find that out so that you can be very specific in your presentation. And just for fun, I looked for the very first resume that I could find. And I don't know if this was the first one ever written, but it's the most interesting one that I found. It was written in 1492 by Leonardo da Vinci. And it's awesome. I mean, obviously you can't read it, but I'm going to tell you some of it that's on. I mean, maybe some of you can read it. I'm not going to assume that you can't. But it's genius, not surprising. It's genius the way he's presented it. And let me tell you about some of the things that he did. He wrote a cover letter also that was genius. What he did was he wrote this to the Duke of Milan, and he said specifically what he could do. So this is when he was 30. It was before he had painted the Mona Lisa, before the Last Supper, before he painted the picture of the man that's the most famous, picture of man that's out there, before he created the helicopter. Before all of that, in his 30s or early 30s, he was like building bombs and like war stuff, because that's what people were paying for, basically. And they were really phenomenal things. I mean, I'm a pacifist, so I'm not into that so much, but the way he presented this was just amazing. Because he's telling him exactly, he doesn't tell him about all the paintings he's done and all those kinds of things, because it's not relevant for this particular employer. He's giving him point by point exactly what he can do for that employer. So this is just one of the things that he talked about. He also talked about bridges that could be so easy to carry that one man could carry them, but they could immediately be set up across water to flee from the enemy or to pursue the enemy, and then they could be picked back up, and just on, all kinds of things that were basically impossible in his day. And then he asked for an interview by saying that he was willing to demonstrate any of this whenever and wherever the Duke wanted. So way back then, he knew this is the way to do a resume or a CV, is keep your audience in mind and do it brilliantly, which he did. Okay, so on to the kinds of things that you'll want to include. This will vary, obviously, depending on what sort of resume or CV you're doing. But I'm not going to read all this to you, just the obvious things. You're giving an overview, you're providing information about honors, awards, special achievements, and then these are the kinds of things that you include. The order that you include them depends, again, on where you're sending them, depends on your particular discipline, and I can't stress enough, you'll want to check with your advisors, your professors, people further along in the program, your mentors, to find out what particular kinds of conventions happen in a CV or resume for your major, for your discipline, because it will be different. I work with all of arts and sciences and all, that's fine, come on in. It's okay, sure, come on, yeah. It'll be different depending, and it can be vastly different. So what we'll be talking about here is very general, but you'll want to find out what's right for your discipline. Some just general things about CVs. Your education will always be at the top. When you're 80 years old on a CV, an academic CV, your education will be at the top. The other thing that's different about a CV is that everything that you've ever done generally goes on a CV. There can be awards from decades ago that will still go on a CV. That doesn't generally happen on a resume. Depending on your discipline, again, CVs can be different in terms of how much detail you use. So on a resume, you might get very specific about something that you taught in a class that you taught in biology, how many people, what sorts of methods you used in teaching. All these would be separate bullet points. There could be 5 to 6 bullet points. On a CV, it might say instructor, introduction to biology, and that's it. So again, it's important what the conventions are. What I also ask people to do if they're looking at academic positions is we go online and look at the place where they're applying, and we pull up CVs of people who've gotten jobs there in the last 5 years or so, not the ones 20 years ago, but the ones the last 5 years or so, to see what they're looking for, what sort of format, because then there's a subliminal thing going on. When you send yours, it's kind of like, oh, they're already one of us. I mean, they belong here, so it just works. As long as it's perfect, no typos. We'll talk about that too. Something that's easy to do on a resume or CV, and part of the reason this is easy to do is that if you Google it, you'll find every imaginable thing that you're supposed to do on a resume or a CV, and almost always is contradictory. Dana and I were talking about how on Pinterest, they'll show that you should put a photo. No, you shouldn't. If you're a model, or if sometimes for international resumes, they'll want a photo, but otherwise, no, you don't put a photo. Because the fact that this information can be so contradictory, again, it's good to check with people at the Career Center before you send something out. Other things that can be contradictory, some bloggers who maybe have been in the business for 8 months will tell you that you need to go on and on about your personal hobbies and interests, because that'll give you something to talk about in the interview. No, it won't, because you won't get that interview. So just be very careful, very professional, and check with us. Because I know that there's so much information out there, but we can help you with picking out the correct information, what's going to get you that job. Also, I've seen plenty online about putting things from high school. No, not unless you were first in the nation in something and it's relevant and it was just really spectacular. Otherwise, nothing from high school. Untrue or partially true information, I mean, that one's obvious, but sometimes people will try to just sort of slip something in, you know, because it's close. You never want to do that, because if that's found out, that's grounds for immediate dismissal. I've seen, we'll talk about video resumes in a bit, and I've seen some go viral, not in a good way, because something's been found out, you know, that they didn't actually do this or hadn't actually accomplished that, and you just don't ever want anything like that to happen for you. Errors are incredibly easy to do on a resume or a CV, just because it's so boring to type these things out. And you've looked at it so many times, and you've gone over it and over it. And so you've gone over it so many times that you just don't see it anymore. You just want it to be over with, you know, going over. There's a couple of things that you can do. One is read it backwards, because then you're likely to see the typos, because there's words that are spelled incorrectly, but spell check doesn't catch them because it's still the correct spelling of a word, just not the one that you wanted there. So if you read it backwards, you'll often catch those or catch the typos, and have everybody who's willing to do it read it over for you before you send it anywhere. Also, when you make changes on it, it's really easy to make an error. It's really easy to forget to take that dash out or whatever, especially if you find this fantastic job and you just know you have to send it out right away. Don't send it out right away. Really pay attention, because here's the thing. There are so many other people applying for that great job that you're applying for. And very often, depending on where you're sending it, it'll go through scanning software first. And if you get through that, then it goes to someone lower in the organization whose job is to screen you out. That's their whole job, is to save upper management's time. If you have so much as one typo, it goes in the trash. It doesn't matter how great everything else is, because they immediately think, well, this person doesn't have attention to detail, didn't care enough to really work on this, so what would they do on projects here, whether that's true or not. So you can't have one mistake. Just be very careful. Have your friends check it, have your advisors check it, have us check it. Flair, the only thing I mean by that is, I mean, obviously on a CV, sending it to an academic institution, no flair. No colors, if it's at all a conservative kind of a program. Sometimes you can get away, again, talk to the advisors that are specific to your degree, because it's I don't know, what do you guys think about color? I mean, maybe, yeah, in business, absolutely not. So Kevin's saying no, never in business. Yeah, not even in human ecology. Okay, ag, I would imagine no. Okay, I see a lot of CVs with color and kind of interesting things. I once saw one with, and I'm not exaggerating, it was a long time ago, and this person is way out of state, so there's no way anyone would be able to track this back, but this individual had hearts on the border, and I was so flipped out about that I had, after I didn't say anything other than we should move those, but I ended up walking around campus for an hour and a half after that, because I couldn't believe that I had just seen that happen. So very careful about being professional. Something that your advisors can talk to you about too is being professional everywhere online, but that's a different subject that we can talk about at another time. Okay, at this point, do you have questions? Also, anytime you want to stop me and ask a question, please do so. We've got other things to cover, but is there anything from what we've covered so far? Yes.
Some job announcement, they ask for a resume / CV.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean that you can send either a resume or CV or.
Yeah, generally speaking, it means you can send either. Is this in the US or outside the US? In the US, yeah. There are some situations where it's better to send a CV, like if it's for a research position, obviously a postdoc position, any of those kinds of things. And again, you could ask your advisor in that particular situation. So which major are you in? What are you doing? Geography. Oh, definitely a CV then. Yeah. Sometimes it's just on the form because they'll have people just through that whole system, they'll have people that are applying, but not for academic positions. So for example, if I was going to apply to one of these places, I'd send a resume. So that's why it says resume CV, but for faculty, yeah, you would never touch a resume for that. It's always going to be CV. Other questions? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead and we'll come.
Yeah, so it's like if we have like athletic achievements, like what kind of things that we should do?
How long ago?
Within 3 years, 2 years.
And is this for an academic setting or is it for another kind of like a industry position?
Oh yeah, just like years, like campus wise.
Oh, I mean, in terms of where you're going to apply.
Oh yeah, like but it's good to include in
For industry?
Yeah.
Yeah. It depends. And again, that would be something probably to ask specifically where we looked at your resume specifically. And it also depends on where you're applying because there are some companies, like I think Enterprise is one of them, that yes, they would want to see that on your resume. There are other companies that would too because it shows a level of character, leadership, being able to hang in there. I would say, do you think, yeah, I think most of the time, yes, you would add it. It would be toward the bottom. Certainly you wouldn't lead with it, but yes, I would think so. And especially when it's that recent. And then you had a question. Sorry.
Yeah, it was just kind of to piggyback off the resume slash CV. For applying, there's certain places where they they tell you to submit the resume, but then later on the application, they have an option to input your CV. And I just wanted, I guess, your thoughts on does it, like, how beneficial is it that you also submit a CV or not?
Have you guys seen that? What type of position would it be? Like, where have you seen it?
I guess entry-level engineering positions.
Huh.
It's giving you the option to upload. It gives you the option to upload a resume or CV, but then it says, do you have any additional kind of material that you want to submit? And usually have the CV option there as well.
Okay. I mean, normally what people will do is upload other kinds of supporting documents and not necessarily a CV in addition to the resume. If it's a particular case where it might add something, like if it's a position where there's also going to be research, or you'll be, if the publications or the kinds of things that you've done will also add to it, but they've mainly asked for a resume, you could go ahead and upload that also. But if they're so similar that it doesn't really do much for you, then I'd just stick with the resume. Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, if they say to upload like CV or resume, so what do you prefer that we should upload, like CV or the resume?
Depends completely on the position and whether it's inside or outside the US. Almost everywhere outside the US, it would be a CV. Inside, it depends on the position. Like, what would be an example?
Like
Statistician? I would upload a CV for that. Actually, what I would do is probably a hybrid between a CV and a resume, and we'll look at an example of that so that you've got more detail like you would in a resume, but because you can use the CV format, it means that you can go past 2 pages, so you can also put in publications and presentations and those kinds of things, which generally don't fit in the 2-page resume kind of format. Anything else before we move on? I can tell your graduate students, you all look tired. I remember it well. Okay. These are just some generic examples. Again, we're not going to go through these piece by piece, and I won't read these to you. I think Dana created this one, didn't you? The generic one. The kinds of things to keep in mind. On a CV, generally, there's less emphasis on work experience. When we look at examples, I'll show you a section on additional work experience. It's usually more about projects, papers, volunteer work, things that have to do specifically with the degree that you're getting. On a CV, it doesn't matter if you got paid for it or not. A resume is you're a little more likely to be putting paid work on a resume, and then having the other kinds of things considered more under like the volunteer section or something like that. Anytime you can be precise, be as precise as possible. So for example, research has shown that if you can be very specific about a number, it's actually more believable than if you round up. So a resume is probably the only place that 9.25 million is more than 10 million. It's worth more than 10 million, because if you're that precise, then that's more believable. If you just say about 10 million, they're thinking, yeah, it might have been about 10 million, it might have been about 6. Sorry. It's right in my blind spot of my glasses. So yes, precise, specific, also something to keep in mind, a variety of things. The first page is prime real estate. Wherever it is that you're applying, that first page has to be perfect. They're going to spend between 3 and 30 seconds on your resume or CV the first time, and you'll go in the yes, no, or maybe pile based on that 3 and 30 seconds. Also, the latest research says that almost nobody has an attention span over 8 seconds, which I find terrifying. So maybe think in terms of that. Okay, I've got 8 seconds to catch this person. Research also says that the first 10 lines are the most important. If you haven't caught them in the first 10 lines, they probably won't even read the rest of the page. So all things to think about. The relevant coursework, the times that you would use this is if it adds something in that. So let's say you've got a degree, or you're getting a degree that isn't that well known, and you're applying someplace that maybe at least the first HR people aren't going to necessarily know what you did in your program. You can put relevant coursework then, or if, let's say you did some additional kinds of things, took additional courses while you were here to broaden your knowledge base that weren't just in statistics. Let's say it was one of the graduate certificates in applied mathematics or something. I mean, definitely you'd want to put that in to show that you have a broader type of experience. Depending on if it's a CV or resume, this might say, if it's a resume, it might say professional experience, it might say relevant experience, related experience. If it's a CV, it's probably going to say teaching or research, and you'll separate those out, the teaching and the research sections, and you'll separate them, or what you put first depends on what sort of institution to which you're applying. If they're a 4-year liberal arts college, then teaching is going to go first. If they're mostly a research institution, then research is going to go first. So always think in terms of who your audience is, what's going to be most important to them. Yes?
And what would you put first there, your research experience?
Yeah. Yeah. I was trying to think if there's any situations that wouldn't be that, and I can't think of one. I would think the research experience would go first. I mean, certainly if you've had another internship or other kinds of job related experience, I would put that before your research experience, if it was just really directly related, like you had a great internship. But if it wasn't, then I'd start with your research section. Yep. Yep. Yes.
So on the previous slide, when you show the master, you have a master or something. I finished my PhD, and sometimes on the job announcement they ask you about interdisciplinary work. So I wonder if I should include my committee members because they are from different departments, and that would give me show the people that I do interdisciplinary work.
Probably. Yeah. Yeah, and again, we could look at it and make sure, but I think I think probably. And I just looked at Don and remembered I'm supposed to repeat every question. I'm sorry, Don. Help me remember everybody to repeat every question. The only time you'd put additional work experience, that was, let's say if you're sending to an academic institution, that's probably only going to be if it's a 2-year institution. Very unlikely that a 4-year institution wants to know that you were a teller or a lifeguard or anything like that. But occasionally the leadership skills or the people management skills or something will be relevant to a position. Also, if you went straight through from undergraduate to graduate, it can show, this additional work experience can show that you worked your way through undergrad, let's say. And you could make it specific with because the other thing about this is you'll see action verbs toward the front, and you can be very intentional about what you're getting across about what you gain from those experiences. Otherwise, at your level, you're probably not going to be putting additional work experience if it's not pretty related. Now, anytime you can put the top of something or ranked #1 in something, so any superlative of an adverb or an adjective, managed the fastest growing, had the lowest error rate, anything like that catches their attention, especially if you can put a metric of some kind that draws the eye in. So if it's a resume, now with a CV, very often, depending on your discipline, you'll put your dates over to the left. Resume, always on the right. The most important things are to the left. The most important bullets are toward the top, because very often they're only going to read the first 2, maybe 3 bullets the first time through. And so you'll want accomplishment statements with strong action verbs, with metrics, if at all possible, to draw them in and get them to look, and also to show what you're capable of. So if you think of the difference, even something simple, like saying, let's see, travel to New York for client meeting. And then there's a variety of different things you could say instead. But if you said, I was the only, and you wouldn't say I, because you don't use that on a CV or a resume, only intern selected to travel to New York City with senior management for a client meeting. Be specific when you can. Show how this sets you apart from others. Okay, any questions about any of these kinds of generic things before we? And as you go through, for those of you doing CVs, as you go through, you'll be breaking apart the publications and grants. I mean, they'll be in all sorts of different sections. Right now, you probably just have one section, but it'll turn into book chapters and journal articles and poster presentations, and then some of those might fall off when they become like a book review, for example, later on in your career won't be as important.
Jump back to the additional experience, additional work experience.
Sure.
Just to clarify, that is different in some industries from industry experience. So if you bring industry experience in engineering or business or apparel, textiles, or something like that, I would have a section maybe that's called industry experience and make sure that I do keep that on my CV for a while. So that's a little bit different. Like this would be additional work experience would be maybe a part-time job at a convenience store or something that's totally unrelated.
Definitely. Yes. If it's industry experience, even if you're going for an academic position, if you have industry experience in that area, then definitely that'll be on your CV. Yes.
So you're in the military, how do you break down your job title from that? Does it go down as industry experience and you can apply it to your future job, or does it go down as work experience? Because I was working in positions over 6.5 years.
There's so many different ways to answer that. So the question was, from the military, do you break that down as industry experience or work experience, or how do you do that? One thing I would do is look at ONET because they have a really great, no, that's not working for you? Ah, okay. Well, in that case, you'd work with one of us and we'll figure it out. But in most cases, it would be professional experience. You'd call it professional experience. And then you'd put the job title, and then in the bulleted points, we would translate so that someone would understand what that meant. You know, you wouldn't obviously use military acronyms or anything like that. But that's what we generally do. And it's sometimes people ask, well, should I even put that on there? Yes, absolutely. You put that on there. That shows so many transferable skills. It would make no sense at all to not highlight those things. Any other questions? Okay, we're just going to look at a few examples. And this one is one that you could think of as kind of like a hybrid between a CV and a resume. You see on here that she has a profile statement at the top. Depending on your discipline, you may or may not use a profile statement if it's a CV. If you're using a resume, I highly recommend it no matter what discipline you're in, unless one of your advisors says don't do it in this particular case, because its objectives are basically gone now, unless you're at a career fair and you're looking for a particular thing and you can hand it and it says, you know, that you're looking for this particular type of thing. But a profile statement starts the document off on the right foot because it says what you can offer. An objective statement used to say what you want. So not only does it start out by saying what you have to offer, but it also highlights, because remember, we've got very short attention spans looking at this, it highlights the kinds of things that you want them to know about you first so that it entices them to look at the rest of the document. So these highlighted things are there, and then the rest of the document backs up what you've said in the profile statement. So this is the other experience kind of thing that I was talking about. In this person's case, she went straight through from undergrad to grad, and there were particular kinds, she was applying to a community college, and there were particular kinds of things that she wanted to show that she had. And so in this case, she put the other experience. Normally you wouldn't see that unless it's like what Dana said, specific industry experience that was in something that somehow is related. That's their publications. This one again, you see the qualifications summary. And it's a CV, so the education goes first. Actually, on a resume, your education will go first for about 10 years. About 10 years out is when you move it to the bottom or close to the bottom. The only time you might move it before then is if you're going to do something that's completely outside the degree that you got, but you have lots of relevant experience and you don't really want that degree to be the first thing they see. You want the relevant experience to be the first thing they see, and then you might move it down. One of the things I like about this CV is that she did a really nice job of showing the lab and tech skills, the cell biology, biochemistry techniques. I mean, it's just quick, easy for someone to look at that. Sometimes people will just have a long list, and I can promise you they don't read that long list. But this, they can just glance at it and see, okay, she's got the 5 things that we most need. And then, of course, the teaching and research experience. This one's from a PhD in electrical engineering. It's just a bit different way of doing a CV. It's what you'd see in that discipline. Again, it's a little bit more of a hybrid because it's got more of what you would see in a resume in terms of the action verbs, the additional detail. Now, if this person were going to apply just for academic settings, they probably have less detail. And again, the teaching and research. And it takes a long time to get an entire CV on. Okay, so this one is a person who originally was going to go into academia, and she decided kind of last minute that she was really more interested in industry. She was absolutely determined to get everything on one page. I can't remember how long her CV was, maybe 10 pages, something like that. Mary Ellen and I worked together on this one. This is someone from a number of years ago. I don't know what it was about one page, but she wanted it on one page. And she managed to get fantastic information on one page. Right at the top, so it works like a profile. Right at the top, she's telling them exactly what she can do for them, exactly what she's capable of, and then goes into the education and so on. It doesn't look like it's all on one page, but it was all on one page. Okay, and this is someone with an MBA. So it's a resume. Again, in business, almost always it's one page. Is that right, Kevin? Yeah. Even since I work with alumni, CEOs are still expected to get their resume on one page. I don't know who makes the rules. I don't know who they are, but that's the rule if you're in business. So this person did a really nice job in those first 10 lines, again, even without the professional profile, of letting the prospective employer know what they're capable of doing. Yeah, this one was very nicely done. Okay, some additional ways. Now, Don, can you help me out how I can click on those? Do I just, okay, because sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, so we'll see how that goes. Okay. Yeah. And I need to figure out how to click through. So what this is a visual resume. So this would be, almost always it would be for a resume specifically. You wouldn't necessarily want to do this for a CV, but we're going to look at other things that you would do with a CV. One of the reasons for this is you want to stand out. you want to have additional, when they Google you, because 80% of the time they're going to Google you, you'll be able to show them your work, depending on what you're in. If you're somebody that would be able to show your work with graphs and pie charts and all that kind of thing, you can do that. Or if you're a design person, you can show it this way, that way. This one, let me say one more thing about that. What you probably don't want to do is a video resume, where you've got the camera on you and you're doing a video resume. It's incredibly time consuming. It's incredibly difficult to do it well. And it's a hassle all the way around. And usually the feedback isn't great. Now, if you're a PR person, a marketing person, if you're really good at that kind of thing and want to show what you could do in front of a camera, then that's completely different. But for most of the rest of us, it's better to do something like one of these things that I'm going to show you. Would you guys agree with that? Have you seen really great video resumes done? Yeah, some, maybe in, yeah. Usually it's safer to steer away. But if you do have one that you'd like us to look at, by all means, have us do that. So this one, oh, well, it's not going to let me look at it. Okay. What this person did, see if it works this way. No. What this person did is just simply use PowerPoint. And he had, I think, 56 PowerPoint slides where he told a story of his, of how he started and then what he did next. And he showed pictures of all the places that he'd worked. And maybe anybody who wants this, I can send it to you, and on a computer you'll be able to get it to pull up. I'm not sure why he's not pulling up here. So that's one option. You could do it just as slides and then upload it to something like SlideShare. Or if you want to make a movie out of it, you can time it so that when someone goes in, it'll just click from one to the next. So that's one option. Another option is an online portfolio. And these are just some examples of one of the places that you can do that. And we won't click through any of them. It's just to kind of give you an idea. Now, for those of you that are looking at academic positions, usually you'll want to go with a professional website. And this one, for example, is David Vales. He got a PhD here in history a number of years ago. And this is one of the ways that he secured his positions by doing this professional website. It had all of his, basically everything that he'd done that was, that related to the different places that he was applying. He would also send this, and he got a great job. Actually, he got two great jobs. He had one great one, and now he's got another great one. And I know in his case, he felt that the website made all the difference because he got a lot of comments from employers about it. There's also on the Career Center website, there's some things specific to graduate students. I'll just show you that real quick. There's more, but this just shows you some of the job search resources for graduate students. And okay, what questions do you have?
What was on the professional website? What did it all?
He had all of his publications, all of his community service kinds of things. So he had pictures and all kinds of And again, I can send this to you, and you can take the time to look through it, or you can just look up David Vail history website, and it'll come up. He told his story in the About section. He had a section that talked about the jobs. He had a section that was his entire CV. And he just did it, I mean, on Weebly, I think it was free, and he did it fairly quickly, and it looked great. I've noticed that he's added to it. Again, this is years ago that he first started working on it.
If you have an online portfolio, where do you the link for that?
It can be in a lot of different places. You could, for example, put it on the CV or resume itself so that they can just click through. Yeah. You can attach it to your LinkedIn profile. You can have everything in one place so that your website and all your social media and everything is all in one place. Where else have you seen it? Like, I mean, if it's like a visual CV, you can upload it to YouTube. I mean, you can do all kinds of things with it. And one of the important things is you want to make it searchable so that when they do look for you, they'll see that, they'll see your LinkedIn profile, you know, so the best things come up to the top. A lot of times people will use it not just because it's a great idea, but also because they can't get everything into the 2 pages of the resume, or there's things that they just can't show on a black and white CV. And it's just a really great option to make yourself stand out, to show how committed you are to this particular field. If you've got all these different sections about things that you've done. And okay, is there any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much for coming.